September 14th, 2023. When flames tore through the Hartford mansion, everyone ran out, except one 8-year-old girl who ran straight into the inferno to save the millionaire's trapped daughter, risking everything while others stood frozen in fear. But when investigators uncovered the real reason why little Zoe Williams was even at that mansion that night, the truth shattered everything the millionaire thought he knew about his own family. So what secret was worth dying for? The Cunningham estate sat like a crown jewel on Riverside Drive in Greenwich, Connecticut, where old money whispered and new money shouted. Robert Cunningham, 42, had built his fortune in tech acquisitions, the kind of wealth that came fast and stuck around. His home reflected that success. 8 bedrooms, a tennis court, infinity pool, and windows so tall they made visitors feel small. This Saturday morning, Robert stood in his home office reviewing contracts, his silver-rimmed glasses perched on his nose. Through the window, he could see his daughter Lily, age 7, playing on the swing set, her blonde ponytail catching the sunlight. His wife Victoria had left early for her Pilates class in Manhattan, leaving him to handle the contractors renovating the East Wing. The renovation was Victoria's project, updating the outdated guest quarters she claimed embarrassed her in front of their friends. Robert barely cared about interior design, but he cared about keeping his wife happy. Their marriage had become transactional somewhere between his second startup exit and her 5th charity gala. They were partners in maintaining an image, not building a life. Robert glanced at his watch. The electricians were supposed to finish rewiring the East Wing today. He'd paid premium rates for weekend work because Victoria wanted everything done before their annual autumn fundraiser next month. For 100 guests, orchestra, catered dinner, the kind of event that appeared in society columns and confirmed status. 3 blocks away, in the modest apartment complex that bordered the wealthy neighborhood, 8-year-old Zoe Williams was helping her mother pack cleaning supplies into a worn canvas bag. Zoe had warm brown skin, intelligent dark eyes, and braids tied with colorful beads that clicked softly when she moved. "Mama, can I come with you today?" Zoe asked, zipping up the bag carefully. Her mother, Patricia Williams, age 34, paused while folding microfiber cloths. She worked as a housekeeper for several families in the area, including doing occasional deep cleaning jobs for the Cunninghams when their regular staff was overwhelmed. "Baby, you know Saturdays are my long days," Patricia said gently. "Mrs. Chun is expecting you at the community center for art class." "But I finished my project yesterday," Zoe protested. "And you said the big house has a library with a rolling ladder. I want to see it." Patricia smiled despite her exhaustion. Her daughter had inherited her late husband's love of books and questions. Marcus had been a teacher before the car accident 2 years ago. Now Patricia worked 3 jobs to keep them in this apartment, to keep Zoe in good schools, to maintain the life Marcus would have wanted for their daughter. "Maybe next time," Patricia said, though she knew the Cunninghams barely acknowledged her presence, let alone would welcome her daughter. To people like the Cunninghams, housekeepers were invisible, efficient ghosts who made messes disappear. What Patricia didn't know was that Mrs. Chun had called that morning to cancel art class due to a family emergency. Zoe, determined and independent like her father, made a decision. She would surprise her mother at work. She knew the address, 1247 Riverside Drive. She'd heard it dozens of times. At 10:30 a.m., Zoe slipped out of their apartment, her small backpack containing a library book, a juice box, and the drawing she'd made for her mother. The walk to Riverside Drive took 20 minutes. She'd memorized the route from car rides. Meanwhile, at the Cunningham estate, the electricians were finishing up in the East Wing. One of them, distracted by a phone call about another job, left a heat lamp positioned too close to vintage curtains in the guest bedroom. He'd come back to move it. Just 5 minutes. Robert was on a conference call when Patricia arrived through the service entrance. She moved quietly through the house, beginning her work in the kitchen. Lily played outside, humming to herself on the swing, and Zoe walked up the long driveway, admiring the massive house, completely unaware that within the next hour, everything would change. The heat lamp was already warming the fabric of those curtains. Smoke had just begun to curl upward, invisible for now, but hungry. At 11:47 a.m., Patricia was polishing the mahogany banister in the main foyer when she noticed something odd. A faint burning smell, like overheated plastic. She paused, sniffing the air, but dismissed it. Old houses always had strange smells, especially during renovations. In his office, Robert was deep into financial projections when his smoke detector began its piercing shriek. He yanked off his headphones, confused. Probably dust from the construction work triggering the sensors. He stood up, annoyed, ready to silence the false alarm. Then he saw it through his office window, dark smoke billowing from the east wing's second-floor windows. Lily! The name tore from his throat. He bolted from his office, taking the stairs 3 at a time. The east wing was fully engulfed now, flames licking through the windows like orange serpents. His daughter had gone inside 10 minutes ago, saying she wanted to get her favorite doll from the guest room, the exact room where the fire had started. Robert reached the east wing corridor and hit a wall of heat and black smoke. The flames roared with a sound like a freight train, consuming everything. He tried to push forward, covering his mouth with his sleeve, but the heat drove him back. His eyes watered. His lungs screamed, "Lily! Lily!" His voice was swallowed by the inferno. Patricia heard the screaming and dropped her polishing cloth, sprinting toward the commotion. When she rounded the corner and saw the flames, her professional composure shattered. She pulled out her phone and dialed 911, her fingers shaking. Outside, neighbors began emerging from their estates, drawn by the smoke column rising into the clear September sky. Within minutes, a crowd of about 20 people had gathered on the Cunningham lawn. Mostly household staff from neighboring properties, a few joggers, and the landscaping crew from next door. Robert stumbled out the front door, his face blackened with soot, coughing violently. "My daughter's inside!" He screamed at no one and everyone. "She's in the east wing. Someone help me." 2 of the landscapers, young men in their 20s, tried to approach the entrance but were beaten back by the heat. The fire had spread impossibly fast. The old curtains, the wooden floors, the antique furniture all feeding the flames. "The fire department's coming," someone shouted. "Just wait." But Robert couldn't wait. He tried to charge back inside, but 3 men grabbed him, holding him back as he thrashed and screamed his daughter's name. The sound that came from him wasn't human. It was primal. A father watching his child burn alive. Zoe reached the end of the driveway just as the first fire truck sirens became audible in the distance. She'd been admiring the house, excited to surprise her mother. When she saw the smoke, her stomach dropped. She ran toward the crowd, searching for her mother's face. That's when she heard Robert's anguished screaming. "Lily's in the east wing, second floor, guest bedroom." Zoe's mind flashed to all the times her mother had described the Cunningham house layout, talking through her cleaning route during dinner, mentioning which rooms needed special attention. Zoe had a near-photographic memory, something her teachers always praised. She could picture the floor plan like a map in her head. The east wing, second floor, guest bedroom. She knew exactly where that was. Patricia spotted Zoe in the crowd and her face went white. "Zoe! What are you doing here? Get back." But Zoe wasn't listening. She was watching the firefighters jump from the truck, still 40 seconds away from being ready. She was watching Robert collapse to his knees, sobbing. She was watching the flames consume the east wing. And she was calculating. The main staircase was blocked. But the service stairs, the narrow back stairs her mother used, those entered from the kitchen side, far from the east wing fire. If she could reach those stairs, climb to the second floor, and cross through the main hallway before the fire spread. "Mama," Zoe said quietly, her voice eerily calm. "I know where she is." Patricia grabbed her daughter's shoulders. "Don't you dare." But Zoe was already running. Everything happened in seconds that Zoe's small frame darted through the crowd like water through cracks. Someone shouted, "Stop that kid!" But she was fast, fueled by adrenaline and purpose. She hit the front door at full sprint. The heat slammed into her like a physical force, but she ducked low where the air was clearer. Smoke billowed overhead, thick and black. She pulled her shirt over her nose and mouth. The foyer was relatively clear. The fire hadn't reached here yet. Zoe ran toward the kitchen, her sneakers squeaking on the marble floor. Behind her, she could hear screaming, her mother's voice rising above the others. "Someone stop her! My baby!" The service stairs were exactly where her mother had described. Narrow, plain, designed for staff to move invisibly through the house. Zoe grabbed the railing and started climbing, her heart hammering so hard she could hear it over the roar of the fire. Second floor. The hallway here was filled with smoke, but she could still see. She counted doors. 1, 2, 3. The guest bedroom was the fourth door on the right. The heat was overwhelming now. The fire was close, eating through the walls. Zoe's eyes streamed with tears from the smoke. Her lungs burned. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back. But she thought of her father. Her father died trying to help someone else. Her father who always said, "Courage isn't not being scared. It's being scared and doing it anyway." Zoe reached the fourth door and pushed it open through the smoke and flames. She saw her. A little blonde girl, unconscious on the floor beside an overturned dresser, a stuffed elephant clutched in her small hand. "I found you," Zoe whispered. Zoe dropped to her knees beside Lily, her small hands shaking as she checked for breathing. The 7-year-old's chest rose and fell shallow, but present. Smoke inhalation, probably. The stuffed elephant lay inches from her fingers, its fabric singed. "Wake up!" Zoe whispered urgently, shaking Lily's shoulder. Nothing. The fire was spreading fast. Through the doorway, Zoe could see flames crawling across the hallway, sealing like luminous vines. The heat was unbearable. Her skin felt like it was shrinking. She had maybe 60 seconds before the path back would be completely blocked. Lily was bigger than her, maybe 15 pounds heavier. Zoe grabbed under Lily's armpits and pulled. The girl's body was dead weight, her head lolling backward. Zoe's arms screamed in protest, but she thought of her father again. Marcus Williams had pulled a woman from a car wreck minutes before it exploded. He'd carried her 100 yards. If he could do that, she could do this. She dragged Lily toward the door, inch by agonizing inch. The smoke was thicker now, pressing down like a wool blanket soaked in acid. Zoe's vision blurred. Her legs wobbled. She stumbled, nearly dropping Lily, but caught herself. "Come on, come on," she chanted through gritted teeth. They reached the hallway. The ceiling was fully engulfed now, flames rippling overhead. Zoe stayed low, pulling Lily along the floor. The service stairs were 20 feet away. Might as well have been a mile. Her lungs were shutting down. Each breath felt like swallowing broken glass. Black spots danced in her vision. She could hear voices below, her mother screaming, firefighters shouting, but they sounded distant, underwater. 10 feet from the stairs. 5 feet. Then her legs gave out. Zoe collapsed, still gripping Lily's arm. No, not like this. She couldn't fail. Not when they were this close. With the last of her strength, Zoe rolled Lily toward the stairwell opening. The girl's body tumbled down the first 3 steps, then stopped. Zoe crawled after her, barely conscious now, operating on pure survival instinct. Firefighter James Mitchell was the first through the service entrance, his thermal camera sweeping for heat signatures. He'd been doing this job for 12 years, and he'd learned to trust his gut. Everyone said the kid who ran in was suicidal, that no one could survive in there. But he had to try. His camera picked up 2 shapes near the base of the service stairs. Small shapes, both still. "I've got them," he shouted into his radio. 2 children, service stairwell, southeast corner. "Need backup now." He pushed through the smoke, his breathing apparatus hissing. When he reached the stairs, his heart nearly stopped. A black girl in a pink t-shirt, unconscious, collapsed over a blonde girl in a flower dress. Both covered in soot, both terrifyingly still. Mitchell scooped up the blonde girl first. She was closest to the exit path. He ran her out through the kitchen door where paramedics were staged. The crowd erupted in chaos as he emerged. Robert Cunningham surged forward, but the paramedics held him back. "Sir, let us work." Mitchell didn't pause. He turned and ran back inside for the second child. Zoe was where he'd left her, crumpled on the stairs. He grabbed her, cradling her against his chest, and sprinted for the exit. The ceiling behind them groaned and collapsed, sending up a massive shower of sparks and ash. When Mitchell emerged with Zoe, Patricia's scream cut through every other sound. She broke through the crowd, shoving past police officers and firefighters, and reached for her daughter with trembling hands. "Baby, baby, please." Her voice shattered into sobs. The paramedics laid Zoe on a gurney. Her eyes were closed. Soot covered her face. Her breathing was barely perceptible. Robert stood 10 feet away, watching paramedics work on both girls. Oxygen masks. For lines. Urgent voices calling out vitals. His brain couldn't process what had just happened. A stranger's child had run into his burning house and pulled out his daughter. A little girl, 8 years old at most, had done what he couldn't do. "Who is she?" he asked hoarsely, looking at the black woman sobbing over the smaller girl. "Who is that child?" No one answered him. Everyone was too focused on the emergency unfolding. Lily's eyes fluttered open first. She coughed violently, the oxygen mask fogging. Robert dropped beside her gurney, his hands hovering over her, afraid to touch, afraid he'd break her. "Daddy." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm here, baby. You're safe. You're safe." Tears streamed down his face, cutting tracks through the soot. "There was a girl," Lily whispered. "She pulled me." Across the lawn, Zoe's eyes cracked open. The first thing she saw was her mother's face, twisted in relief and terror. "Mama, I'm here, baby. Don't talk. Just breathe." Zoe's gaze drifted past her mother to the chaos around them. The fire trucks, the burning house, the crowd. Reality crashed back. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. Another girl. Zoe managed. Patricia looked over at Lily, who was now sitting up slightly, clinging to her father. "She's alive. Because of you." As both girls stabilized, the crowd began to process what they'd witnessed. Cell phones had captured everything. The moment Zoe ran into the flames, the agonizing minutes of waiting, the firefighter emerging with both children. "That little girl is a hero," someone said loudly. "She saved the Cunningham kid. Did you see how small she is? Who even is she?" A local news van pulled up, having monitored the fire department scanners. A reporter with perfect hair and a microphone approached the scene, her cameraman filming everything. Robert finally stood and walked toward Patricia and Zoe. The crowd parted, sensing something significant was about to happen. The reporter followed, camera rolling. "Excuse me," Robert said, his voice rough from smoke and emotion. I'm Robert Cunningham. That's my daughter over there." Patricia looked up, her arm still wrapped protectively around Zoe. She'd worked in his house for 2 years, and he'd never once looked her in the eye. Now his face was streaked with tears and soot, his expensive shirt ruined, his carefully maintained composure shattered. "Your daughter saved my child's life," Robert continued. I don't even know your name." Patricia's jaw tightened. Of course he didn't. "Patricia Williams. This is my daughter, Zoe." "Zoe." Robert said the name like he was memorizing it. He turned to the little girl on the gurney. "You ran into my house, into a fire, for someone you didn't even know." Zoe looked at him with those intelligent dark eyes, still clouded with pain but sharp as glass. "I knew where she was. Nobody else did." The simplicity of the statement hit Robert like a physical blow. This child had possessed information that could save his daughter, and instead of hesitating, instead of waiting for adults, she'd acted. "Thank you," he said, his voice breaking. "Thank you for my daughter's life." Zoe nodded slightly, then winced. The paramedic intervened. "We need to transport both girls to Greenwich Hospital. Smoke inhalation, possible burns, need full evaluation." As they loaded the gurneys into ambulances, the reporter stepped forward with her microphone. "Mr. Cunningham, can you tell us what happened here today?" Robert looked at the camera, then at Zoe being lifted into the ambulance, then at Patricia climbing in behind her daughter. "A hero happened," he said quietly, "and I didn't even know her name until 30 seconds ago." The ambulances pulled away, sirens wailing. The fire was finally being contained. The crowd began to disperse, but Robert stood rooted to the ground, staring at the ruins of his East Wing, processing a truth that was just beginning to dawn. He'd lived next to this woman and her daughter for 2 years, passed them in hallways, benefited from Patricia's labor, and he'd never seen them. Not really. Not until a child with more courage than any adult present had run into an inferno and emerged carrying his entire world. Greenwich Hospital's emergency department had seen its share of crises, but the arrival of 2 young girls from the Riverside Drive fire brought an unusual intensity. Doctors and nurses swarmed both exam rooms, their movements precise and urgent. Dr. Sarah Okonkwo worked on Zoe in room 3, listening to her lungs, checking oxygen saturation levels, examining the minor burns on her hands and arms. The girl had been lucky, mostly smoke inhalation, first-degree burns, nothing that wouldn't heal. But the psychological impact, that was harder to measure. "You're very brave," Dr. Okonkwo said softly, shining a penlight into Zoe's eyes, "but also very foolish. You know that, right?" Zoe's voice was raspy. "My dad used to say brave and foolish look the same until it's over." Patricia sat in the corner, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She hadn't stopped shaking since the ambulance ride. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her daughter disappearing into those flames. "Your father was Marcus Williams?" Dr. Okonkwo asked, recognition flickering across her face. "The teacher who died in that accident on I-95? Patricia nodded, surprised. "You knew him?" "My nephew was in his class. Marcus stayed late every Tuesday to tutor him in math. Wouldn't take a dime for it." Dr. Okonkwo looked at Zoe with new understanding. "He was a good man. Seems his daughter inherited more than his smile." Next door in room 4, Lily Cunningham was responding well to treatment. Her lungs were clearer, her vitals stabilizing. Victoria Cunningham had arrived from Manhattan 20 minutes ago, her Pilates outfit replaced with designer jeans and a cashmere sweater, her makeup slightly smudged from crying. "My baby," Victoria kept repeating, stroking Lily's hair with manicured fingers. "My precious baby." Robert stood by the window, still wearing his soot-covered clothes, staring out at the parking lot without seeing anything. His mind kept replaying those moments. His helplessness, Zoe's small figure darting through the flames, the firefighter emerging with both girls. "Robert," Victoria's sharp voice cut through his thoughts. "Are you even listening? Dr. Chun wants to keep Lily overnight for observation." "That's fine," he said automatically. "Fine? That's all you have to say." Victoria's voice rose. "Our daughter almost died because you were too busy with a conference call to notice a fire starting." The accusation hung in the air. Robert turned slowly, his face unreadable. "You're right. I was working. Where were you?" Victoria's mouth opened, then closed. They stared at each other across their daughter's hospital bed, years of unspoken resentments suddenly visible. Lily's small voice broke the tension. "The girl who saved me. Is she okay?" Robert's expression softened. "She's next door. The doctors are taking care of her." "What's her name?" "Zoe. Zoe Williams." Lily tested the name on her lips. "Zoe, I want to say thank you." "Later, sweetheart," Victoria said quickly. "You need to rest." But Robert was already moving toward the door. "I'll check on her." Robert stepped into the corridor just as Patricia emerged from Zoe's room. They nearly collided. Up close, without the chaos of fire and crowds. He could see the exhaustion carved into her face, the worry lines around her eyes, the faded medical scrubs she wore. Probably her work clothes. "How is she?" Robert asked. Patricia's guard went up immediately. She'd spent years being invisible to this man, and now he was asking about her daughter like they were equals. "She'll recover. The burns aren't serious." "Thank God." Robert ran a hand through his hair. "I need to. I want to thank her properly. And you." I don't know how to even begin. You don't need to begin anything, Patricia interrupted, her voice carefully neutral. Zoe did what she thought was right. We don't need your gratitude or your money. The words stung more than Robert expected. I wasn't going to offer money. I was going to offer, I don't know, whatever you need. Hospital bills are covered by my insurance, Patricia said firmly. Mr. Cunningham, I've cleaned your house for 2 years. You've never once asked my name, never acknowledged my daughter's existence, even though she's come with me twice when school was closed. So forgive me if I find this sudden interest uncomfortable. Robert felt his face grow hot. She was right. He'd walked past her dozens of times, perhaps said good morning once or twice, but never really seen her. She'd been part of the house like the furniture or the fixtures. You're absolutely right, he said quietly. I've been blind. Patricia's expression didn't soften. Being blind is one thing. Choosing not to see is another. Before Robert could respond, Dr. Okonkwo emerged from Zoe's room. Mrs. Williams, Zoe's asking for you. She's getting agitated. Patricia moved past Robert without another word, leaving him standing alone in the fluorescent-lit hallway, her words echoing in his head. In the hospital waiting room, televisions mounted on the walls were tuned to local news. The Riverside Drive fire was the lead story. Footage showed the mansion engulfed in flames, firefighters battling the blaze, and then, captured from someone's cell phone, a small figure in a pink shirt being carried out by a firefighter. 8-year-old Zoe Williams, who witnesses say ran into the burning mansion to rescue 7-year-old Lily Cunningham, daughter of tech millionaire Robert Cunningham, the anchor narrated. The heroic act has already gone viral on social media, with many calling Williams a guardian angel. The footage cut to Robert's brief statement. A hero happened, and I didn't even know her name until 30 seconds ago. The clip was being shared thousands of times, dissected, and discussed. Hashtag Zoe the Hero was trending. Local news stations were camped outside the hospital, hoping for interviews. In the hospital cafeteria, Robert's assistant Trevor had arrived with fresh clothes and Robert's laptop. He found his boss sitting alone at a corner table, nursing terrible coffee. The press wants a statement, Trevor said, sliding into the seat across from him. Your publicist has drafted 3 options. Also, the fire marshal wants to speak with you about the cause. Apparently, it was an electrical issue with the renovation work. Robert didn't look up from his coffee. Trevor, how long has Patricia Williams worked for us? Trevor blinked at the subject change. The housekeeper? 2 years? Maybe a bit more. Why? Did you know she had a daughter? No, sir. I didn't. Her name is Zoe. She's 8 years old. She likes books. Her father died 2 years ago. He was a teacher. Robert finally looked up. And I never knew any of that until today. Trevor shifted uncomfortably. With respect, sir, it's not really your job to know the personal details of household staff, isn't it? Robert interrupted. This woman works in my home, cleans my daughter's bedroom. I have access to everything I own. And I treated her like she was invisible. He pushed the coffee away. What does that say about me? Trevor had no answer for that. Late that night, after visiting hours had ended, Zoe woke screaming. Patricia was dozing in the chair beside her bed and bolted upright. Baby, I'm here. I'm here. Zoe was sitting up, eyes wide but unfocused, trapped between sleep and waking. The fire. I can't find her. The smoke. Show you're safe. You're in the hospital. You saved her. You saved Lily. The name seemed to anchor Zoe. Her breathing slowed. She looked around the dim room, at the 4 in her arm, the monitors beeping softly. Reality returned. I couldn't breathe, she whispered. Mama, I couldn't breathe and I thought. She didn't finish, but Patricia understood. Zoe had thought she was going to die. This 8-year-old child had looked death in the face and kept going anyway. Patricia climbed onto the narrow hospital bed, careful of the 4 lines, and wrapped her daughter in her arms. You're the bravest person I know, but you're also going to give me gray hair by 35. Zoe managed a weak laugh. Then, quieter, would Daddy be proud? Patricia's throat tightened. Baby, your daddy is so proud of you. Wherever he is, he's bursting with pride. She pulled back to look into Zoe's eyes. But he'd also want you to know that your life is precious. You don't have to save everyone. But if I could and I didn't. Zoe's voice trailed off. Isn't that the same as hurting them? The question was too big, too old for an 8-year-old to be asking. But Marcus had raised a child who thought deeply, who felt responsibility like weight on her shoulders. Before Patricia could answer, there was a soft knock on the door. A nurse peeked in. Sorry to disturb you. There's a little girl in the next room who won't sleep until she knows Zoe is okay. Would it be all right if? Patricia looked at Zoe, who nodded. Moments later. Lily Cunningham appeared in the doorway, wearing a hospital gown and clutching her stuffed elephant. Behind her, Robert hovered uncertainly. Lily walked slowly to Zoe's bedside. For a moment, the two girls just looked at each other. One blonde and sheltered, one dark and street-smart, brought together by fire and courage. Hi, Lily whispered. Hi, Zoe whispered back. Thank you for saving me. Zoe shrugged, suddenly shy. You're welcome. Can we be friends? The question hung in the air. Two girls from completely different worlds, connected by a single act of extraordinary bravery. Zoe glanced at her mother, who nodded slightly. Yeah, Zoe said. We can be friends. Lily smiled, the first real smile since before the fire. She held out her stuffed elephant. This is Mr. Trunks. He was in the fire too. You saved him. Zoe took the elephant carefully, examining the singed fabric. He's very brave. Not as brave as you. Robert watched this exchange from the doorway, something cracking open inside his chest. These two children had found connection in seconds, while he'd spent years building walls between himself and everyone he deemed beneath his notice. Patricia met his eyes across the room. Her expression wasn't hostile now, just tired and sad. They both knew the truth. Their daughters had shown more humanity in 5 minutes than the adults had shown in years. Back in Lily's room an hour later, after the girls had finally fallen asleep, Robert sat in the uncomfortable chair by his daughter's bed. Victoria had gone home to shower and change, leaving him alone with his thoughts. He pulled out his phone and opened Google. He typed, Marcus Williams teacher death I-95. The articles came up immediately. 2 years ago, multi-car pileup during a rainstorm. Marcus Williams, 32, beloved teacher at Madison Elementary, had stopped to help a woman whose car had stalled in the left lane. He'd gotten her to safety just before a truck lost control and struck him. He died at the scene, left behind a wife and 6-year-old daughter. Robert stared at the photo accompanying the article. Marcus Williams smiled at the camera, his arm around a young Patricia, young Zoe grinning between them. A happy family, now shattered. He clicked on another link. An obituary. Marcus Williams believed in service above self. He touched countless lives through his teaching and his unwavering belief that every person deserved dignity and kindness. Service above self. Dignity and kindness. Robert looked at his sleeping daughter. Zoe Williams, who had lost her father to an act of selfless courage, had run into fire to save a stranger's child. She'd inherited her father's code, his belief that some things mattered more than safety. And what had Robert taught his daughter? To maintain appearances? To value wealth? To not see the people who served her? His phone buzzed. A text from Trevor. Fire marshal confirmed cause. Heat lamp left unattended by electrical contractor. He's asking if you want to press charges against the company. Robert stared at the message. Press charges. Sue. Make someone pay. That was the world he knew, assign blame, extract compensation, win. But sitting in this hospital room, watching his daughter breathe, knowing she was alive only because a housekeeper's child had risked everything, what did winning even mean anymore? He typed back, no charges. It was an accident. Make sure the contractor's insurance covers the damage and move on. Then he opened a new message to his lawyer. I need information on how to set up a scholarship fund. Marcus Williams Memorial Fund. For children of working-class families. Full ride through college. I want it operational within a month. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was a start. Robert leaned back in the chair and closed his eyes. Somewhere in his mind, a question was forming. One he couldn't quite articulate yet, but couldn't shake. Why had Zoe known the layout of his house well enough to navigate it blind? How had she known exactly which room Lily was in? Patricia said Zoe had come with her to work twice. But that didn't explain the precision, the certainty in that little girl's movements. There was something he was missing, something that would make sense of all this. But tonight, exhausted and emotionally raw, Robert couldn't chase it. Tonight, he just sat with his daughter and felt grateful that someone else's child had been brave enough to save her. The question could wait. For now. Richard Thornton sat in his lawyer's office, holding a folder containing documents he'd been avoiding for 9 years. His hands trembled as he opened it. Adoption papers, legal declarations, sealed records marked confidential. His lawyer, Margaret Chun, watched him carefully. "You understand what you're asking me to do," Margaret said quietly. "Once you open these doors, you can't close them again. Once Keisha knows the truth, everything changes." Richard nodded slowly. "She saved my daughter's life. She deserves to know why." The truth had been eating at him for 3 weeks. After the fire, once Madison was cleared medically, he'd begun investigating. Not just who Keisha was, but how to find records that had been sealed for nearly a decade. What he discovered shattered the narrative he'd built for himself 9 years ago. He'd met a woman named Sarah Jackson at a fundraiser for underprivileged communities. She was beautiful, intelligent, passionate about social justice. Everything his cold, calculated life lacked. For 6 months, they'd been together. He'd imagined a future. Then she told him she was pregnant. His response had been immediate and cruel. He'd offered money, a lot of money, to make the problem disappear. When she refused abortion, he'd offered to pay for her silence, for complete separation from the child. Sarah had agreed, devastated but desperate. She needed resources to survive, to raise a child alone. Richard had paid her off and moved on, marrying Catherine, a woman from his own social circle 6 months later. Catherine couldn't have biological children. They'd adopted Madison through a private agency, building a family on a foundation of lies and careful compartmentalization. He'd never known that Sarah, struggling alone in a small apartment in Riverside Commons, had named their daughter Keisha. He'd never known that Sarah worked 2 jobs to provide for her. He'd never known that Keisha had been born with his sharp blue eyes and her mother's fierce intelligence. He'd never known because he hadn't wanted to know. But Keisha had known. Or at least, she'd suspected. According to the investigator Richard had hired, Sarah had shown Keisha photos when she turned 8. She'd explained that her father was a man of means who'd chosen not to be part of her life, that it wasn't Keisha's fault, that some people simply weren't capable of love beyond themselves. Keisha had seen Madison at the fence dozens of times. She'd watched her through the gap in the wood, seeing a girl who looked like her, who lived in a world of comfort and safety that she would never inhabit. And when that girl's life had been in danger, Keisha hadn't hesitated. She hadn't saved Madison because of Richard. She'd saved her because of something deeper: blood, biology, a connection that transcended the fence between their worlds. The meeting Richard stood outside Dorothy Williams' house on a gray afternoon, holding flowers he knew were inadequate for what he needed to ask. He'd contacted Dorothy directly, explaining who he was, requesting a meeting with Keisha. Dorothy had agreed, but only on her terms. In her home, no lawyers, no deals on the table. When he knocked, Dorothy opened the door. She was smaller than he'd expected, but her eyes held the power of a woman who'd lived through hardship and refused to be diminished by it. "So you're the man who paid to disappear," Dorothy said without preamble. Richard winced. "Yes. Come in." The living room was modest but immaculate. Photos lined the shelves. Keisha at various ages, Dorothy, and in several frames, a woman who had Sarah's smile. "Keisha doesn't know you're here," Dorothy said, sitting in an armchair. "She knows about you, but she doesn't know you exist in her present. That was Sarah's choice, and I respected it." I need to tell her the truth. Why now? Why not before the fire? Richard had no good answer. Because I'm ashamed. Because I was a coward. Because my daughter's life was saved by a girl I've been pretending doesn't exist. Dorothy studied him for a long moment. Keisha has questions. She's always had them. But she's also learned that some men don't deserve answers. What makes you different? Nothing, Richard said honestly. I'm not different, but I'm trying to be. Before Dorothy could respond, a door opened upstairs. Keisha emerged, her eyes widening when she saw Richard sitting in her living room. She froze on the staircase. Keisha, Dorothy said gently, this is Richard Thornton. Keisha's hand gripped the railing. She didn't move. Richard stood slowly. I know you probably don't want to talk to me. I know you have every right to be angry. But I came here to tell you the truth about who I am and why you matter more than I've allowed myself to acknowledge. Keisha descended the stairs slowly, her eyes locked on his face, searching for something. Recognition, connection, proof that the person standing in her grandmother's living room was real and not some cruel fantasy. You're my father, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes. And Madison is your half-sister. I adopted her 10 years ago. I didn't know about you until 3 weeks ago when you saved her life. Keisha's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. I saved her because she was going to die, not because of you. I know. I don't need you, Keisha said fiercely. I don't need your money or your name or your sudden guilt. You're right. You don't need me. But I need to try to be the person you deserve to have as a father. I need to try to repair what I broke before you were even born. The changes begin over the following weeks. Richard didn't push. He didn't demand relationships or gratitude. Instead, he did something that required more courage. He became transparent. He established a foundation specifically to support single mothers and their children in the Riverside Commons neighborhood. He funded it with $5 million of his personal wealth. He hired Keisha's grandmother as the director, paying her more than she'd ever dreamed of earning. He ensured that the gap in the fence between the Thornton estate and Riverside Commons was permanently removed, symbolic of a boundary that should never have existed. He enrolled Keisha in the same prestigious school as Madison, covering all expenses, making it possible for her to receive the education he denied her. Most importantly, he began having conversations, difficult, uncomfortable conversations, with both his daughters about who he'd been and who he was trying to become. Madison, remarkably, had already begun to understand. In the fire, she'd seen a girl her age put herself in danger without hesitation or expectation of reward. It had changed something in her. She'd started asking questions about inequality, about why some people had everything while others had nothing, about why she'd never been taught about the world beyond the fence. Keisha remained guarded, but she also remained present. She attended the foundation's opening ceremony. She stood beside Richard as he spoke about his failures as a father. She didn't forgive him, but she also didn't reject him entirely. It was the beginning. The video had gone viral within hours of the fire. News outlets ran it on loop. A small black girl running into flames while wealthy guests stood frozen in shock. Within days, the narrative had spread across every platform. Child hero saves billionaire's daughter. 9-year-old's bravery defies odds. Remarkable act of courage. But the narrative was incomplete. Unknown to the public, Richard was preparing to change that. He'd spent 2 months wrestling with his conscience, knowing that the story the world had been told was missing the truth that mattered most. The world saw a random act of heroism. It didn't see a father's abandonment. It didn't see the systemic inequality that had forced a child to save another child while billionaires stood helpless. It didn't see the full picture of who Richard Thornton actually was. His PR team begged him not to do it. They'd crafted a narrative that made him sympathetic, a grateful father, a man transformed by near tragedy, now generously giving back to the community. Why destroy that with a messy truth? Because it was a lie Richard had finally come to understand. And lies were what had created this situation in the first place. The press conference, the main auditorium of Riverside Commons Community Center, was packed. News cameras lined the back. Reporters filled every seat. The fire had made national news, and now, 2 months later, Richard Thornton's statement had generated unprecedented interest. He sat at a table with Keisha on one side and Dorothy on the other. Madison wasn't present, at Keisha's request. This moment belonged to her story, not her half-sister's. Richard looked directly into the cameras and began. 2 months ago, a child ran into a burning building and saved my daughter's life. The world has celebrated her bravery, and rightfully so. But I want to tell you why she was in a position to be that brave. I want to tell you why a 9-year-old girl from this community felt compelled to risk everything for a stranger. He paused, collecting himself. Keisha is not a stranger to me. She's my daughter. I abandoned her mother before Keisha was born. I chose money, status, and a carefully constructed image over my responsibility as a father. I paid to erase my involvement. I moved on with my life and pretended she didn't exist. Gasps rippled through the room. Reporters leaned forward, recognizing the magnitude of what was happening. When Keisha saved Madison, she wasn't saving a stranger. She was saving her sister. And she did it with no expectation of gratitude, no knowledge that I would ever acknowledge her, no hope that anything in her life would change as a result. Richard's voice cracked slightly. That is the kind of person my daughter is. Not because I raised her, because I didn't. She is the kind of person she is because of her mother, Sarah Jackson, who raised her with integrity, kindness, and courage despite my abandonment. She is who she is because of her grandmother, Dorothy Williams, who stood as the true parent when I abdicated that responsibility. He turned to look at Keisha, his expression raw with regret. For 9 years, I lived in a world separated from this community by a fence that represented the boundaries of my conscience, the limits of my empathy. My daughter had to burn that fence down to make me see her. The consequences, the revelation sent shockwaves through the media, business, and society. Business partners questioned Richard's stability. Some distanced themselves, uncomfortable with a man who'd publicly admitted to such profound moral failure. Others praised his honesty but remained wary. Character flaws of this magnitude didn't simply disappear with a confession. But something unexpected happened as well. The story shifted public conversation. Instead of celebrating individual heroism, people began asking harder questions. Why was there offense? Why did two communities live so separately? Why was it acceptable for a billionaire to abandon his child while remaining respected in elite circles? Universities invited Richard to speak about accountability. He accepted, but not to restore his image, to confront it, to explore the structures that had allowed him to live comfortably while his daughter lived in poverty. Social media exploded with responses. Some were supportive, others vicious. Richard received messages telling him he was a monster, that no press conference could undo 9 years of abandonment, that Keisha owed him nothing. He didn't argue with any of them. 3 weeks after the press conference, Richard announced the expansion of the Keisha Jackson Foundation, named after his daughter, not by his choice but at Keisha's insistence that he acknowledge her name publicly. The foundation would provide full scholarships to 50 students from Riverside Commons each year, fund after-school programs and mental health services, create mentorship programs pairing community members with corporate professionals, support Sarah Jackson, now as a board member, in developing policy recommendations for wealth distribution. Richard publicly committed $20 million over the next decade, money he'd made through the very real estate practices that had kept Riverside Commons isolated and underfunded. It was reparative, but he knew it could never truly repair 9 years of absence. Keisha's statement 2 weeks after the press conference. At Keisha's request, she gave her own statement. She was composed, careful with her words, a child forced to be more articulate than children should need to be. My father left me before I was born. He chose money over my mother. He chose his comfort over my existence, she said simply. I saved my sister because she was burning, not because I knew she was my sister. I didn't know that when I ran into that fire. Keisha paused, her young eyes carrying an old wisdom. I'm not forgiving him because he gave me money or because he said sorry in front of cameras. I'm learning to know him because he's trying. Every day he's trying to be different. I don't know if he'll stay. I don't know if this will last. But right now he's showing up. And that's all I asked for. She looked directly at the camera, speaking to every child watching who'd been abandoned, neglected, or forgotten. You don't have to earn your father's love. You don't have to save someone's life for him to care about you. You already matter. You already count. Don't let anyone, including him, make you believe otherwise. 6 months after the fire, the autumn sun filtered through the windows of the renovated community center as Keisha stood on stage, receiving a scholarship certificate. But this wasn't a ceremonial moment designed for optics or media coverage. The camera crews had moved on months ago. The viral moment had faded from trending topics. This was simply a girl receiving recognition for academic excellence in front of her community. Her grandmother, her mother, her sister, and her father. Richard sat in the audience between Sarah and Dorothy. He wasn't at the center of attention. He wasn't giving a speech or taking credit. He was simply present, watching the child he'd once tried to erase become visible in her own right. The scholarship came from the Keisha Jackson Foundation, a detail that had taken months for Keisha to accept. She hadn't wanted her name on it, hadn't wanted to be memorialized for a moment of crisis. But eventually, Sarah had helped her understand. Her name on that foundation meant something to other children who felt forgotten. It meant they could point to it and know that a child like them had mattered enough to change the world. That was worth reclaiming. The fence is gone where the wooden fence once divided the Thornton estate from Riverside Commons. There was now open space. Richard had demolished it personally, each plank a small act of dismantling the barriers he'd constructed around his life. The gardens had been reconfigured. The manicured lawns that once served only his family were now a community garden where residents of both neighborhoods worked side by side, growing food, planting trees, building something together instead of in isolation. Madison spent 3 days a week volunteering there, learning from people whose lives were radically different from her own. She'd started a mentorship program connecting estate children with community children, not to serve or save anyone, but to learn from each other, genuine peer relationships across a divide that should never have been built in the first place. Keisha came to the estate regularly now, not as a guest or visitor, but as she belonged there. She had a room she'd decorated herself, books she'd chosen, space that was hers. But she maintained her primary residence with her grandmother, refusing to completely merge her two worlds into one. She was learning to exist in both, to be fully herself in each space without erasing the other. Sarah's voice. Sarah Jackson now worked full-time as the policy director for the Keisha Jackson Foundation. She designed initiatives that addressed not just poverty, but the systemic structures that created it. Her voice, once silenced by Richard's financial coercion, was now published in major journals and sought by universities and nonprofits worldwide. She'd become an expert on intergenerational trauma, on the ways abandonment rippled through families, on the connection between economic inequality and moral failure. Her work transformed the foundation from a charitable gesture into something more challenging, an institution that demanded accountability from the wealthy, not just generosity. Richard had opposed some of her recommendations. She'd overruled him. The board supported her. He'd accepted being outvoted by the woman he'd once tried to silence with money. It was a different kind of education than any business school had provided. The difficult conversations Keisha had still not fully forgiven Richard. Forgiveness, she told him during one of their Thursday evening conversations, wasn't something she owed him. It was something he might earn over years or never at all. She was choosing to build a relationship with him, but on her terms, at her pace, with full knowledge of what he'd cost her. Richard accepted this. He'd learned that redemption wasn't about being absolved of guilt. It was about living with it consciously, making different choices because of it, understanding that some damage could never be fully repaired, only acknowledged and prevented from repeating. Madison had asked him difficult questions too. Why had he hidden Keisha? What did that say about how he saw people from poor communities? How had he justified ignoring his own child for so long? He'd answered as honestly as he could, which meant admitting to prejudices he was still unlearning, to complicity he was still confronting. These conversations happened at the dinner table on Sunday nights, the three of them, sometimes with Sarah and Dorothy joining. They weren't comfortable, but they were real. The moment at the garden. One afternoon, Keisha found Richard alone in the community garden, hands in the soil, planting tomato seedlings. He was bad at it. His gardening gloves were too expensive, his technique inefficient, but he kept trying. She sat beside him without speaking, and together they worked in silence. After 20 minutes of planting, Richard looked at her. "I know I can't fix what I did," he said. "No," Keisha agreed. "You can't. But I'm trying to be someone who wouldn't do it again. Someone Madison won't be ashamed of. Someone you might, eventually, be glad to know." Keisha considered this, her hands in the dark soil beside his. "You're getting there," she said finally. "Slowly, but you're getting there." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a possibility. It was the beginning of something neither of them could have predicted. Not a family built on blood or obligation, but on the difficult work of choosing each other repeatedly, day after day, in small moments like this one. 1 year later, the fire had been extinguished a year ago. The building had been rebuilt as a community meeting space instead of a private garden house. The fence had been gone for months. The lawsuit had been settled. The media had moved on to other stories of crisis and redemption. What remained was the quieter work of change, the daily choices to see each other, the consistent effort to dismantle systems of separation, the slow rebuilding of trust between people who should never have been divided in the first place. Richard Thornton remained wealthy, but wealth had been stripped of its comfort. He'd given away enough that his net worth had decreased significantly, though he remained privileged by any reasonable measure. More importantly, he'd given away the illusion that money could solve moral problems. Keisha remained a child, but childhood had been complicated by the responsibility of saving someone, by the power of her father's transformation, by the weight of being a symbol while still just trying to grow up. She'd learned early that heroes weren't born. They were forged through circumstances and choice. The story could have ended with the rescue. Could have been a moment of heroic inspiration where a child saves the day. But the real story began after, in the difficult, unglamorous work of accountability, of building relationships across division, of choosing to see the humanity in someone who tried to erase you. The fire had burned away the fence. What grew in its place would take years to fully bloom. But the seeds were planted.